I don't listen to too much other.
Going live.
Me too. In 3, 2, 1. We are live, LIVE, in the Weirman Media Studios again. So, folks, remember, it's not right, it's not wrong. It is always simply our perspective. If you're living beyond your means because you can't pursue your dreams, that is a major issue we need to look at and understand why that is. Are you living beyond your means so you can't pursue your dreams? A big part of what we do and why we talk about so many different topics is so that maybe you can find the courage and you can find the commitment to go and chase your dreams and chase your passions. And in order to do so, you must not live beyond your means. At We're in Media, that's what we're all about. We're about bringing intellectual value freely at scale to others so that you and others can maybe get out of feeling stuck and stagnant and find some hope in life, and also move forward maybe thinking, oh, these guys are actually trying to do something good with social media as opposed to do something bad with social media or manipulate or play a facade or so forth. So, Isaiah, what are we going to be talking about today on the show and moving forward in the next 30 to 60 minutes?
Today I think we're going to talk about listening, the importance of listening, and I know that's a broad term, but we're going to break it down and give some good examples.
Thanks for being with us, folks.
I'm going to share how I practice listening, why me practicing listening is actually one of the highest forms of compassion, and it's actually one of the highest forms of intelligence. Again, we are designed with 2 ears and 1 mouth. If you look at really smart and wise people, they actually speak less. They let someone else talk, and they're just actively listening and really analyzing their information without judging the person, and to then develop their own ideas. And not only that, that shows that you care, that you actually look at that human in front of you and that you respect them enough to give them the chance to express where they're at, and you're not judging them, but then you can rephrase what they're telling you back to them. So this is what you're telling me. And that's how you can help them. And that's also how you can help them bring awareness to them and yourself and connect and grow, even if you have differences. So to me, proactive listening, respecting someone, allowing them to talk, allowing them to express themselves, not attacking them, but then allowing them to bring that to light, and then allow yourself to tell them how you feel and how you see what they're saying and bring awareness. That's how we change our perspective. That's how we grow. That's how we connect. And I think it's one of the most important things in life. I actually think it's the number one skill that can allow someone to be successful, actually. One of. Not number one. But one of the best skills that make you likable. I think I'm relatively likable for the most part when I'm in a good place. I give anybody the opportunity to talk to me and express where they are. And to me, it's like an ultimate skill and a challenge. But I feel like it's one of the best skills, no matter what you're doing in life, and especially in business. If you're in business, you're not a great listener, you're never going to be great at business, because it requires to listen to your consumer. It requires to listen to your boss, to your coworkers, to your employees, whatever level you are at a job or in a business.
Yeah, business just multiplies it.
It's just like, and when you talk about that, and it's the ultimate way to be of service. Like if I'm just not listening, and like my brother said, that means I think I know the answer already. That means in my mind I'm not listening to you because I don't care. Either one. I could just be, I don't give a fuck.
Which is ego.
I could just not care because I just want your money. That could be one. Or two, I think I already know the answer and I'm right. Therefore, I don't need to listen to you. So those are the two biggest reasons that I've seen people and myself, when I catch myself tuning out and I'm listening to only reply. Again, most people listen to reply, not listening to understand. This is a very good training exercise that I do with myself. And I catch myself doing this. I do listen to reply. I got to stop in that mindset, like, dude, you're not listening to understand right now. You're not listening to understand. And if you do that, you can clearly see why people have trouble communicating, because both people are just listening to replying. And it's super selfish and disrespectful. And I myself am guilty of this. And this is what I see more than anything right now, especially with politics and race and religious beliefs right now going on. And everything's extreme in election year. And I think it's really important to talk about this so we could start to listen. And then be able to audit ourselves and then have a really open dialogue and not say right or wrong, not that I'm better than or less than, but to do it to grow and connect and move each other forward as a humanity. That should be the end game in this. And to me, that's what I want to talk about.
I think that's a great topic and a lot of stuff you touched on there, but ultimately it's about listening and the importance of listening. But to me, it all starts with myself, right? Because If I ever want to listen to someone else's wants, needs, and desires, I have to know my own. And I have to be able to meet my own. And that all comes back to self-awareness. So I think everything that we're talking about is great, but I think really it starts with the first step of the Weirman growth steps, which is awareness, which comes from an audit. Because self-awareness and just self-awareness in general is what leads us to be able to listen. And I think that's not talked about enough, and understanding that really listening starts with me. And change starts with me. And if I want to go out there and be the change or represent the change, I have to be the change. So that starts with me being aware of myself, my wants, my needs, and my desires, and then looking at it, having a plan and strategy, a purpose and a direction and a mission to go and make that happen. So that's exactly what leadership is. That's about how people bring people together via some sort of society or tribe or group and bring them together to unite for a common goal, and then working with a strategy to achieve that goal. That is leadership. So I think what you're talking about is a lot of stuff that we can lean into, and I think it's great. But ultimately, when you look at stuff like racism and other things, ultimately the first step in anything that anyone does is to be able to look at themselves, because the change comes from within. The change isn't external, the change is internal and internal auditing of ourselves and the change in representing the change. So that's why I think it's big that you talk about being authentic and being and looking at the people that are actually taking the action and doing the things out there, starting a podcast or starting a business or taking a risk, and they're committed and they're courageous in what they're doing, and they're completely committed and courageous in their openness and authenticity. And I think that's a lot of great points, and those are the people that we should lean into. And I think authenticity is really valuable and aspect of all this. But I think listening is a difficult topic because the world's so complex today that there's so much going on and being juggled and complex. There's so much to process that I feel like a lot of times people, they're spending their whole life, let's say it like this, people are spending their whole life never really ever finding themselves. So how can someone listen in a world that's so complex and they don't even know who they are and what they want to do in their life? And then how are they supposed to ever listen or be a part of something and change anything else or help impact something else positively if they can't do it for themselves?
I think it's not as difficult as we make it. It's like, if you don't know who you are, if we want to get into that, it's simple. You got to taste things and just go to what interests you. That's pretty simple. So for me,
the majority of Americans aren't doing that.
I understand that. So, but to address that specific thing that you talked about before I get into some listening stuff, if you're that lost, there's a spectrum. So I think some people know what they want to do, they're just not doing it. They're just not taking action. Some people have no idea. I've been at different places. For me, you just, what interests you and kind of gravitate towards that. Follow and listen to people that are doing things in your mind, in your dreams, in your imagination, what you might want to do. And if you don't know, just do something that interests you and follow and listen to that person who's already more successful doing what you want to do. I think that's the first step. And in that experience, you'll begin to have an audit and a realization of what you're doing. Like we've shared, taste different things. I think that's the first step of trying to find yourself. And then that can get you to where you need to be. And then I think, but when it comes to listening, again, it's very simple. Again, if we audit ourselves about, am I listening to reply or am I listening to understand? Do I think I'm right? My bias is right. Am I open-minded to listening to someone who looks differently, who believes a different political system, who believes in a different God or no God? Whatever their opposite end of the spectrum is, am I willing to listen to them and understand? Do I care? That's what if you look at auditing, that's the audit within listening to do that. And then the action to be able to do that is actually practice this and listening to understand, not to reply. And even if you don't care, try to make yourself to care and have enough slow down. Okay, listen, I know I have my emotions here and I think I'm right. And I know I don't agree with this person, but I'm going to sit here and listen. That's the progress. That's listening to understand. That's listening to not, versus replying. That's having an open mind that I could be wrong. That my answer, even though I feel is right, this person's perspective could change that. But if I'm unwilling to listen, there's no progress being made. So I think it's really important in 2020, listening, these two specific things is really important. And I think it's glaring in certain topics like racism with the cops and the police brutality and blacks, and then with politics, red versus blue, with religion, abortion, non-abortion. I feel like those are the hottest topics right now. Those are the hottest things. We can clearly see how these principles, if applying to those, could have drastic change. Not only that, when it comes to social media, and like my brother says, following your passions and your own wants and needs, being able to listen to other people that are ahead of you or doing what you want to do, and trying to have a narrow mind and block out everyone else that tells you how you should live your life, but follow and listen to people that inspire you, that are already doing what you want to do, and just follow and listen to them and take their suggestions and be open-minded that that person can give you the answers. But if you think you're right and you know everything and you're starting a business or trying to do something new and you're not willing to listen, so part of that is mentorship. If you're not willing to listen to someone else who's more successful, I don't even like to use the word successful, who has more experience than you. Because like my brother and I, we always like to talk about experience. If you have someone in front of you who has that experience and they're doing something that's attractive that you want to do, I think it's really important to follow and listen to that person and have an open mind to what their process is and what they have done to find their success and happiness. So I think that's another issue. So that's kind of how I think when it comes to listening. And it's the ultimate form of humility, listening. And again, we have 2 ears and one mouth for a reason. And again, this is how we connect and grow, via storytelling and connecting. Because when we're sharing our opinion, we're sharing our story. Because our opinion is rooted in our experience, like we talk about here all the time. So I think it's super important to do all those things. And this is where the awareness and the growth comes in finding yourself. But it doesn't happen if we're not willing to take any form of action and we're not willing to slow down and stop just trying to reply to everyone instantly, emotionally with our ego because we're defensive and we need to argue and prove our point.
So I think it's really interesting stuff. I think it's a great point. But I think listening in 2020 has never been more complicated. And I think the consumer, on the consumer end, it's really, in life in general, has never been more complicated as far as content and flooding our brains with advertisements and digital this and digital that. So I think it's pretty complex, actually. But I do think the solution is simple, and I do think but I think it's very challenging. I think the simplest things in life seem to be the most difficult because they require repetition and they require consistency and they require discipline and they require fortitude. But at the end of the day, the simplest things sometimes require the most input and the most work and the most discipline. So I think it's just simply like what you said, storytelling and people sharing their truths. And you say speak your truth, film your hustle, right, Zaya?
Film your hustle, speak your truth.
Film your hustle, speak your truth. So if people started turning the cameras on and sharing their authentic truth when it comes to racism, start sharing it. Broadcast it on social media. Be open and authentic in it. I think you're right. It would, and I think if we can replace ego with ambiguity, which is creative expression and imagination, that would be a great solution to what you're saying. I think a lot of people, if we just took the goal and we said, okay, we want to overcome racism, let's start bringing the microphone in front of all the people that have struggled with racism. Let's bring a voice to them. Let's let them turn their voice on and share it with the world in a powerful, authentic fashion. And then no one can tell them they're wrong or right if they're sharing their truth and their
but
reality.
even if they do that, the issue still is people need to listen to people like that.
But when
no
people
one's
start
listening.
speaking, the dialogue and the communication, a big part of what we're talking about listening in 2020, the topic for today is communication. So
topic is listening in 2020.
Yeah, and if you read the definition of communication, listening in 2020 is the topic, and listening is one of the highest levels of communication.
Exactly.
The act of listening involves complex, effective, cognitive, and behavioral processes. That's listening is key to all effective communication. So if someone has
listening.
So if you have a problem or you have a situation you're trying to change or a goal or a mission, communication is the number one most important aspect of that mission.
That's what I'm saying, though. But everyone's listening to reply; they're not listening to understand.
Yes,
That's
but people aren't also sharing their truth in a powerful, authentic fashion.
I understand that. I agree.
People aren't. How come all these?
But again, people still aren't listening to understand.
But the first step in that is being open and authentic to your story and having it shared at scale. These people aren't doing that. So that's what. That's
part of it.
That's a huge part of it. They're not having the dialogue and the communication within themselves to even go out and have it start anywhere else. If I want to have dialogue and conversation with myself, or I have a vision of it happening somewhere else, I have to first start it here at home in my own slot.
So what's the solution?
It's starting a podcast. It's people need to start sharing their stories at scale, turning on your Facebook and using the social media.
I understand that.
We're using the tools of technology.
What can other people do, though?
That's exactly it.
But we need other people to understand the back end consumer that isn't to listen, really.
But if everyone wants to change, they sit back and they bitch and complain and then they don't do shit. Like, do something. Start a business behind it. Start a nonprofit behind it. Start a podcast behind it.
Yeah, but
start something.
I get it. But
Don't
what I'm
sit in the
saying
comments
is
and
people aren't listening, bro, to each other. No one's listening.
That's how you force this to happen. A podcast forces dialogue and listening.
I know it does, but that's huge progress. But I still think no matter what you do, it's how you do it. Again, if you could do all that stuff, but if you, like I said before, if you have a hidden agenda, if you're being selfish about it, you're not doing it.
Solomon, can you stop going in and out of the cup, please?
If you can't do that, if you're like, I think that's great. But one, it has to be doing that for selfless reasons. It has to be doing it so you can connect and to understand to other people. So these principles I'm talking about need to be rooted in no matter what form of communication, where you're the one creating the podcast, doing that, like my brother's saying, via storytelling, or you're the one listening to other podcasts. Like, whether you're both, whatever end of the spectrum you are, it needs to be rooted in the principles of trying to understand people, connect, and grow. Understand, connect, and grow. Listen to understand. Listen to not reply. Listen to that their idea or their experience can bring you knowledge and value, and not judge them in the process. And there's just a lot of judging going on. There's just a lot of hate. And I think a lot of people need to keep those things in their forefront of their minds, whether they're starting a podcast or listening to a podcast, to really begin to have more
The thing about a
connections.
podcast, though, is that you have to listen. That's the beautiful thing. So even if I'm starting a podcast, I then start to have to do all these things. That's what's beautiful about it.
You don't have to.
Yeah, you do, because your audience starts to dictate. Yeah, you do, 100%. Because people
You should do those things. It's be smart, but you don't have to do. You could still be doing your podcast and do whatever you want. And
You're right.
people.
If you're really,
You don't have to do that. No,
You don't have to. But
and there are people that aren't.
But if you start,
They're
a
online,
podcast,
social media, and they're fake gurus. They're not actually doing
but if
exactly
you
what
start
you're
a
saying.
podcast, you have to look. Like, I've heard my audience give me feedback, and I'm like, okay.
Yeah, but you're listening.
And I'm like,
to
okay,
understand.
and I'm asking, and I'm yes. But
You're
ultimately-
practicing the principles that we're talking about. There are people that aren't doing that, though. That's what I'm talking about. That's the problem.
Yeah,
The
so
solution is
that's why we have to audit where we put our attention. So we living in a world where culture and attention is online. Culture and attention is all present online. So once you realize that obscurity and attention in business are really your two biggest enemies. I mean, obscurity is your enemy. So culture and attention directly correlates to listening. Wherever we put our culture and attention, that's where people are going to listen the most. So you're right, Zaya. So people tend to listen to people on social media and digital avenues more than anything. And it just so happens to be that we're giving our trust away freely on these avenues more than we ever have in the past. We see someone on social media that's talking some big game about sales or selling whatever or doing whatever, guru like you said, and they're a complete hustle, they're a complete con, they're a complete fake. So I agree with you. It's a great topic to talk about where our culture's attention is and why it's there and why they're giving their attention to that area and who we're giving our attention to. I think that's another great topic, and then we can lean into that as far as listening today and understanding that we can't be listening to everyone. We have to have and develop a compass of people that are maybe 2, 3, 4 people or 5 maybe, but limit that voice and that compass that's giving you direction, purpose, and a mission. When you navigate the nuances of growth, you're going to have to navigate roads you've never navigated before. So you're going to need a compass as you navigate the nuances of growth. And for me, I've always looked to the elders. I've had a sculptor, I've had a pilot, I've had my father, I've had Tom Allis, I've had people that are older than me I've looked to typically. And that's what it is. It's having a compass to navigate the nuances of growth, the roads of the unknown. And when you're doing something you've never done before, the reality is that you need to be able to know and how to navigate that. And a big part of listening in 2020 in culture and business and attention is about how to navigate the unknown. And I feel like a lot of people don't know how to listen. So a big part of it, they end up online in today's world, and they're looking at it and hearing all of these different people on social media and YouTube and Instagram and Facebook, and then they're just giving away their trust to them and attention freely, and they don't know how to audit their attention or audit who they're trusting. So that's why, again, I always talk so much about auditing our income and our actions and our emotions and so forth in the first step of the Weirman growth steps, because this all begins with perspective and awareness. Perspective and awareness is your most powerful tool in life. So that's why I talk about it so much, because if I'm lacking perspective and awareness to why I'm listening to what I'm listening to, where I'm giving my attention and my energy and my trust and my loyalty, I'm going to have it. That's going to have lots of issues. But that becomes all back to self-awareness again and perspective.
Yep.
because that's
So the solution to this, again, that I'll hammer down is, if you're listening to reply, you're not listening to understand. If you're following someone and you're just believing everything they say and you're not listening to understand and critically analyzing their information and sharing their experience and just listening to understand and take an inventory of what they're saying, if it comes off as authentic, if it comes off as real, are they really doing what they say? Are they just talking the talk but not walking the walk? Like, that's really important to do those things when you're trying to listen to who you should follow. I think having 5 people or less is super important. For me, I think 5 or less is a great number. If you can have more people that are solidly spiritually and emotionally fit, that are great leaders and that you really trust, that you get more than that in your life on a personal level or even on social media that you follow, that's great. But I definitely think that 2 to 5 range is a solid number where you can have a tight circle of people in your life or on social media that you really follow for advice. And I think it's rooted in humility and following people and listening that are doing things that you want to do. And then really, like my brother says, auditing what they're saying if they're coming off as authentic and real and vulnerable, or if you feel like they're just someone who has a hidden agenda. But again, to do all that requires listening to understand and not just listening to reply. And it also involves critical thinking, and it involves having the humility to recognize that I don't have all the answers, and that someone else's experience and knowledge and pain and struggle and success on all levels of that spectrum have value. And I think for me, that is a solution, and that is the practical application of action, how I apply this in my life. And auditing myself is, how am I doing that? So all I can do is that very simple thing every day is ask myself, how am I doing that? Oh shit, you know what? Today, I didn't really listen to anyone. I just did whatever I wanted. You know what? Today, I listened to a reply to half the people I was talking about because I was only thinking about myself and some other shit that I wanted to do. I wasn't every conversation I engaged with today, I wasn't listening to understand. Every interaction online, was I actually engaging with the comments, or was I just ignoring people, or was I just like feeding them with bullshit online and not actually engaging authentically? Like, those are the questions that I have to inventory myself to be able to practice those stuff. And then that's how I change and grow and become more aware. Like, that is my solution to this situation. That is how I can live through what my brother's talking about and what I'm talking about on an individual level. That is how I live through it. And if I'm not doing those simple things, then I'm not practicing inventory, I'm not practicing listening, and I'm not practicing growing and caring. So that is my responsibility, is to ask myself, am I doing those things? Am I listening to reply? Like, it's a super simple thing that you can test yourself every day, throughout your day, in every interaction. Whether you're on a podcast online, whether you're talking to people, DMing them on Facebook, whether you're talking on the phone or text messaging, whether you're interacting at work with your family and friends. Like, audit yourself in these moments. Like, am I doing these things?
Morning, John. Thanks, John, for all your support and attention. John Sevilla Estevez said, good morning, Isaac.
Thanks, John. Am I really doing that? Am I really listening to understand? Am I really just following anyone online and taking anyone's suggestion? Am I really being pragmatic and narrowing who I listen to and taking advice and suggestions from someone who's doing it? Am I really listening and auditing them if they're real? Like, that's the solution to all of this to me. And the more I do that, the more I'm able to connect to people and talk to people from different backgrounds and actually listen and grow and connect.
I think what you're talking about is really great stuff, and I think the key is to look at why you're looking at why you trust someone or why you listen, right? And I think what he's talking about, we can look at that and we can develop a system for doing that. You can audit how authentic, how vulnerable, how humble, and how open they are with their story. There's a correlation between someone that's being real and authentic and sharing their deepest secrets or their biggest failures or their biggest inefficiencies and defects with you. Yep. There's a reason people do that, and there's a reason we do it, because it shows that you are bearing it all. When you're bearing it all and you're open and you're leaning into that openness, that shows commitment, that shows courage, and that shows focus and respect, because you're doing that for someone for a reason. You're being vulnerable. And when I talk about my brain surgery, my drug addiction to heroin, my homelessness, and my failures of being in trouble with the law, it's not to like be cool or anything. It's to show you that I'm being authentic and vulnerable, and I'm trying to identify with my shortcomings and defects so that you can understand that you can do the same, and that we all have defects and shortcomings. That leads us to be able to connect, and that leads to listening. Connecting leads to listening. Listening leads to connecting. And in order for that to happen, for me, it comes down to my candid compassion. My ability that through pain and suffering that I've experienced and my struggle and those things I talk about of having had shortcomings and defects and failures and inefficiencies, it's led me to be able to listen more. So I think there's a correlation between listening and having been through some pain and suffering, which we all go through, and having dealt with some extreme traumas and so forth, because the more difficult struggle you've dealt with, to me, it leads to more candid compassion, where you're more open and capable of connecting and being empathetic with others. So my brain surgery, I can relate to people. All these things I talk about, they lead me to be able to connect to others and their pain and suffering. So then in a snap of a finger, shout out to the hostile due north, if someone comes in and they talk about something that involves losing their mother, losing a loved one, or they talk about an addiction, or they talk about being homeless on the streets, I can instantly snap and experience, because I firsthand have experienced that. I'm able to be empathetic and make a deep emotional connection to them via listening, via my candid compassion, because of my direct firsthand experience within that. So I think that's a big topic, but I think what you're talking about is even bigger. It's auditing why we trust what we trust and why we're paying attention to what we pay attention to and why we're giving it our energy. And I think that's listening in 2020 comes back to unhealthy escapism, and it comes back to asking ourselves why we're escaping our life and trusting this person, as opposed to putting our trust and putting our attention and our energy and us and our wants, needs, and desires at the forefront. When why are we going to social media to give our energy and time and attention and focus to someone else? I think that's a really big topic.
Yeah, that would be a definitely good topic.
Because why are we doing that? Why are we going to social media to give away all of our attention and energy when we can just give it to ourselves and our desires and wants and needs?
Yeah, I think, and there's nothing wrong with going online. I think, again, it's just like, who are you listening to? Who are you consuming? That's all. It's like, is that
constructive?
Is that person bringing you value? And is it, like, this goes back to listening to understand. It's the same thing. You're listening to understand that person.
Yeah, and you got a good
point. And if
point.
I'm really listening to understand, I'm going to analyze. If I'm listening to understand, it's the same concept. If I'm following someone online, it's talking about whatever the fuck they're talking about.
You had a great point in the previous episode. You talked about, remember we were talking about create versus consume, and you said we should do double, or you should start with like just doing a little bit more than one. I think that's a great point, and you talked about it before. We were talking about this on a previous episode, creating versus consuming, and my brother mentioned 2 to 1, or even 1 to 1 to start. Like if you consume for 15 minutes, create for 15. And I think it's a big topic, is auditing and I'll let you lean into it, is not only the creation end, but your time consumption and where it's being spent.
Yeah.
Online.
Before I get into that, I want to finish what I was saying.
Yeah.
So, listening to understand, I'm going to talk about this again, because this is the main thing, dude. This is the audit. This is how you practice this. This is how I practice this. Am I listening? This is open-mindedness. This is the principle of what we're talking about, open-mindedness.
One of the key characteristics.
If it's open-mindedness. Am I listening, whoever it is I'm listening to online, am I listening to understand them? Am I? That's the key. And if I'm really doing that, I can then just sit there and critically listen to them. And and this is simple, dude. Does it make sense? Does it seem off? Because it's really easy to see when it's off. Like that usually means someone's being fake. Like, does it make sense to me when someone's starting to say shit and do shit and come off a certain way, and there's just the pieces to the puzzle don't really add up with their actions and their words? That's listening to understand. I can begin to feel like something's off here. And for me, through years of chemical
Thanks for being with us, audience.
From years of being in recovery and working with people, and years of in sales, actually, and years of chemical dependency, my job is listening, and I can tell when someone's manipulating me when it comes to sales, right? You either when you're trying to sell something, trying to buy, or when I'm trying to help someone get sober, and a lot of people lie when they're going into a Rule 25. They're not going to totally tell, but that process, that same thinking I had to do my job, allowed me to be like, okay, something's off here. This person's story, this person's actions, the whole vibe, what they're saying, the puzzle is not making sense. So if I'm listening to understand, I'm trying to put the pieces to the puzzle together, and that's how you can come to this solution, and that's the inventory process. That's the open-mindedness. But if I'm not in my brain doing that, like, I'm never, ever going to be able to get to that place. And when it comes to to touch on what he said, like, I need to be, if I'm trying to do all this stuff like my brother said, then it is a balance of creating and consuming. So, for example, I'm listening to someone online, I am consuming, But that's a better way to consume, is to consume to understand, listen to understand, right? That's still consuming. But then I need to be able to do that specific thing, and then also make sure if I'm creating, which I believe we all should, that I should be creating in the same fashion. That I shouldn't be creating in a way like the one guy who's manipulating to create. He's manipulating to create to get someone to do something for him, versus I'm creating to connect and grow and to get other people to understand me in a vulnerable way. So when you look at both ends of the spectrum, if I'm listening to understand and I begin to do that, it's easier for me then to communicate to someone who's trying to understand me. I'm going to be more effective at practicing that same principle and communicating and speaking and creating in a way where I want people to understand. I'm not going to create in a way where I'm trying to manipulate.
So I think that's a great point, and I think that all comes back to a lot of our characteristics that we touch on at Weirman Media. We have the Weirman Growth Steps and the Weirman X model, which is we have 5 key characteristics of focus, respect, courage, commitment, and focus, respect, courage, commitment, and openness. And that all correlates back to what you just talked about, and it also correlates back to our 3 empirical steps that we mixed in with our focus, which is inspection, transparency, and adaptation. It's everything we just talked about, basically. And ultimately, auditing and gaining awareness to how we can listen and inspecting how we're listening, why we're listening, where we're listening, and so forth. And inspection is the first step of how we're listening, why we're listening. Thanks, Dell, for being with us. Dell's not listening, he says. And then by inspecting that, you can develop an awareness and perspective and understanding of where you stand on it. And then you can move forward via transparency and removal of ego and the courage and commitment. And you can move forward and you can adapt and change and optimize. But I think a lot about what the listening and what we're talking about comes down to just that. It comes down to inspection. It comes down to being transparent with others. And it comes down to being open to grow and change and evolve and be able to go from maybe being a decent listener to a great listener or an average listener to an above average listener or so forth. The willingness to grow. And that's why I myself do all this, is I'm addicted to evolving. I'm addicted to trying to improve and grow and evolve. And I'm addicted to adaptation and improvement. So that's why I started the show. That's why we do what we do, a lot of it. And it's about bringing intellectual value for you without any strings attached. I think a lot of people go online, and to me, the consumption should be directed at something that brings you to push you in your direction of your dream and your passions and your wants, needs, and desires. You should be spending your time and your energy and your money on absorbing information from someone that's doing it or someone that's ahead of you on that, like my brother says, and then pursuing that and taking that and implementing it in your life and how you're taking action. That's exactly what I've done with Gary Vaynerchuk. Thanks, Gary V, and thanks, VaynerMedia, because that's why I mention them in every episode in the copyright, because I've taken his direction and lead, and I've merged it with my experiences, and I'm taking action with the podcast and the content creation model to then go out there and do what he talks about and make my desires, my wants, and my needs my priority, and pursuing my passions and dreams for profit. And by doing that, I've taken direction from Gary Vaynerchuk. But then most of my day has now naturally shifted to creating versus consuming and listening to see what I can put out that would bring value freely to others, as opposed to consuming. I have very little time now to do that. And when I do have time to do that, it's about consuming something from Gary Vee or Joe Rogan or something that brings me intellectual insight, like the book Ego is the Enemy by Ryan Holiday I just did, and so forth, and reading the keynotes on them and then summarizing them and then moving forward with that intellectual value that I can then move forward and bring freely to others. So that's what I do, and that's what I believe is the answer. And I think you touched on that, Zaya, which is being of service and working well with others. But ultimately, you can be of service by turning on your phone and doing this. We've reached thousands and thousands and thousands of views via Facebook Live alone. And if you add in Instagram, TikTok, Snapchat, LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, and other avenues, your ability to connect to others and listen to others and hear others' story and hear where they're coming from and hear them share their story just will amplify 100x because of the fact that the culture and attention is present there. So if you want to listen, if you care, that is where you'll have to be. You have to go where the attention and culture is and the people are. If you truly care and want to listen, that's where you must be, is at the intersection of culture and attention. So that's why I believe so much in talking about and sharing your story on those platforms.
Good points.
Yeah, it's big stuff, because a lot of people aren't sharing their stories on those platforms and they're not even present on those platforms. And if you really care about the consumer or the people that you want to help, that's where all of their time and attention is spent, most of it.
Yeah.
is on their phone and on those social media channels.
I think, again, for me, it was a good point. Listening is a skill that can be developed. Again,
It can.
it's open-mindedness is the principle here. To sum up my points here, I don't really have much else to add after this, but for me, again, it's about listening to understand, not reply. That's the principle in open-mindedness, in that it's a skill that can be developed. And if I care about people and connecting and understanding, I will take the action and responsibility to practice this skill to get better. And the better that I get the skill, I practice it, the better I am at helping people and being of service, and the better I am at connecting, and the more likable I become, and the more I'm able to find purpose. And for me, that's why listening is so important. And I think it's super important, not only on the individual level, but like my brother touched on, when we're going online and we're listening to people and consuming, that we're pragmatic about who we listen to and who we consume. And then also at the same time, as I develop this skill, being able to, on the other side of it, give that same away with the goal of hopefully someone can listen to me and understand. And that's the cycle of giving and receiving, right? In a world of giving and receiving, no one loses. The only time someone loses is when someone takes. Anytime I'm freely giving something and someone's freely receiving, we are both uplifted. That's the beauty of listening and caring. So for me,
giving.
that's the result. That is the result, actually, of this is purpose and connection. For me, when I do this, when I practice this, I end up finding connection, which I then find purpose. So for me, that's super important. So my challenge today is try to be better at listening, to understand and replying. Be aware of your thoughts every day if you're doing that. Be aware of who you're following online. Have critical thinking when you're listening to people. If you feel like you got to unfollow people, unfollow them. Unfollow people on Facebook and Instagram. Narrow your people who you follow and listen to, and your life as well. And if you can get the courage to start sharing your story so others can understand you, get online and start doing stuff on your phone and sharing that stuff, or create a podcast. Start somewhere, even if it's just posting once a day on your platforms. I think that's a great start. Just start posting something. For me, I have to start somewhere. And this is kind of going back to the episode we talked about progress, not perfection. Is you just got to start somewhere. And I think for me, like, just showing up and doing stuff, even if it's not perfect, allows me to remove that judgment and that perfectionism. But I'm just challenging you guys out there to try to get better at listening and practice these principles and sharing at scale, like my brother was talking about, using these social media platforms to do that. And I think you'll really be surprised at how we can connect and develop relationships that we didn't think we could before. It really helps with family, man. When you have family relationships, this is really important, because I think family is the toughest to do this with, because we have so much emotional investment in our history with our family, sometimes good, sometimes bad. And I think if you can practice this with your family and really listen to them, I think it's really important. Or your partner. Like, if you have strains in your relationship with your kids or your partners right now, I think this skill in your relationships in general, even if you don't care about social media really, you're like, I have no interest in starting a podcast, I have no interest in starting a business, I really want you to look at this and be like, how can I apply this to just my relationship with my family and my friends? I feel like that in itself, this has enough value. Even if you're not interested in the other stuff that my brother talks about and that we talk about, I think this value in that will drastically improve your intimate relationships on that level at the minimum. That's the minimum that I hope that you can apply this to. And then if you happen to be able to start getting some momentum and want to do this at scale, great. Like, awesome. That's a new challenge that you can take on to push yourself and grow. So I think no matter where you're at, you can do this.
I think that's some great stuff, and we're going to wrap it up here. But I think being of service and working with others, I think a lot of people act and talk about it like they're about it, but really, I just think that you're really not, if you're not willing to lean into because if you think about what you're talking about, I think it is a really big challenge, and I think it's really cool. But there are a lot of people that talk about being of service and working with others. But really, if you think about it, your reach has never been greater, and your ability to reach more people and meet more people's needs and wants and desires and connect to others has never been greater. You can instantly turn on your phone, your iPhone, your computer, your social media channels, and you can now reach millions, and there's social media followers with millions and millions and millions of people they reach. So you can, it's possible, it's reachable. The most unfeasible things have now become feasible because of technology. But at the same time, it's also the biggest enemy, because it's the complexities of it that makes it difficult for us to focus. It makes it difficult for us to commit. It makes it difficult for us to gain perspective and awareness. It complicates our lives. And complexities are the silent killer of growth. And really, in life, everything's about growth. Life is all about growing and evolving, listening, learning, adapting, and moving forward and more optimized and more via adaptation. So if you can be optimized, if you can inspect and you can grow, that via transparency, that's what it's all about. And it's all about doing so at scale. Why are we here? To listen and understand, John, I agree. I think we are here 100% to grow and 100% to be of service for others. That's what I think. So being of service, I'm going to wrap it up by we are here to be of service. And in order for us to be of service and work well with others, it requires us to be able to listen to our own self and know our own self and listen to our heart and our wants and our needs and our desires. Because then when we're listening to our heart, if we're listening to our heart and we're listening to ourselves and our own passions, our own wants, our own needs, and our own desires, we then can move forward and listen to others. But that requires focus, that requires respect, that requires courage, that requires commitment, and that requires openness to understand the fact that I'm committed, I'm courageous to committing to myself and my wants, needs, and desires and listening to them, but also taking action and courageously pursuing them to then be able to listen to others and share that with others. Because if I'm not listening to my wants, needs, and desires, and I'm not doing that, I have no ability to be able to go out there and be of service to others and work well with others if I'm not putting my wants, needs, and desires first, and I'm not taking care of myself and I can't give something I don't have. So I think a big part of listening is just that, is being able to give something we don't have. And a lot of people, I think, are trying to give something they don't have. So I think a big part of listening comes back to listening to your own heart and listening to your own passions and listening to yourself and then investing in yourself. So I think a lot of us aren't doing that, and I think that's where it all starts, is with me, not we. So I first must have to find myself before I can find out how I can work well with others. So
excellent points. Shout out to Tat. He said transparency. He's actually the person that I first listened to Joe Rogan. He came into work when I used to work at Fond du Lac, and he had Joe Rogan podcast on.
How do you pronounce his name? Indalecio Tatito Romero.
Yeah.
That is a beautiful name, brother.
We call him Tat.
Indalecio.
I
apologize if I pronounced it wrong, but your name is gorgeous. Indalecio Tatito Romero the third. It's a bomb name. And thanks, John.
He's a gorgeous man. He's got a manly beard, man. You want to talk about being able to grow a beard?
John, you said, why are we here? And then Tommy Heron just said, so true, invest in yourself. Yeah, Tommy, that's the big part.
We should get Tat on the show, bro. We should get Tat on the show.
That's a big Tat. We invite everyone on the show. Tat,
DM,
Tommy.
reply to Tat. Tell him if he wants to come on the show. He's got a fight coming up. He fights. He's an MMA fighter. He's got his own academy. He's got a great story, dude. He helps out a lot of people. I used to work with him at Fond du Lac.
Nice. Yeah, so
he's got a fight coming up.
We invite everyone to be on the show, but you're so right, Tommy Hearn. Thanks for tuning in, Tommy. Thanks, everyone, for your attention. Is that a big part of listening starts with listening to our own self, Tommy. A lot of us aren't even listening to ourselves. We're just spending all of our energy and our time, and we're giving all of our focus and our time and energy to other stuff. And we're not listening to our own self. And we're not courageously committed to pursuing our own passions and dreams. So then how can we help others pursue theirs if we can't focus on ours? So
good points. I don't have much else to add. My brother summed it up pretty good there.
Yeah, we're gonna wrap it up there. And once again, remember at Women Media, folks, it is not right. It is not wrong. Sorry, he said something again. Best investment you can make is in yourself. 100%, Tommy. The best investment anyone can make is in their self. I agree 100%. But again, it's never right, it's never wrong, folks, here at Weird Media. It is simply our perspective. And if we can replace ego with ambiguities and openness to inexactness and imperfections, we then will have a lot better chance at cooperating, uniting, rather than fighting. So, thanks, Tommy. Thanks, everyone. Thank
you guys for listening.
Thanks, everyone, for tuning in.